There's an interesting excerpt from the book Nash Бизнес, Смерть, which means Our Business is Death. It's about the Wagner PMC, which has been fighting in Ukraine and also Africa and the Middle East, Russian mercenary group for several years now. The book was published by Meduza, which is an independent Russian newspaper, and this excerpt is actually published on Mediazona, which is another Russian independent newspaper. So I'll try reading it to you. It says, and this, the book, as far as I'm aware, is only available in Russian. So this excerpt I Google translated. It says, journalists Ilya Barabanov and Denis Korotkov wrote the book Our Business is Death, which tells about the rise and fall of Wagner PMC. How, in just a few years, from a small group specializing in contract political assassinations, it turned into an alternative army to Russia and then collapsed literally in a matter of weeks. The book was published by the Meduza Publishing House and the Straightforward Foundation, a foundation that helps create uncensored nonfiction about Russia. With their permission, Mediazona publishes a fragment about how prisoners recruited by Wagner PMC tried for many months to take Bakhmut. Cannon fodder. The recruitment campaign in the prison colonies began just before Wagner's mercenaries entered the Battle of Bakhmut in August of 2022 and became bogged down for many months. At that time, there was an obvious military sense in the assault on Bakhmut. The Russian army continued to maintain control of the eastern part of the Kharkov region, including the small town of Izium, which was seen as a springboard for future offensive operations. It was assumed that after Wagner captured Bakhmut, Russia would be able to begin the final capture of the Donetsk region of Ukraine from two directions, advancing from the north and east to Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and other cities. But, as they say in such cases, something went wrong. At first it turned out that there would be no quick assault on Bakhmut, and Ukrainian soldiers were fighting for literally every house in the city. Then, in September 22, the Ukrainian army carried out an extremely successful, unexpected, and rapid counteroffensive operation in the Kharkov region. Having broken through the front line, the Ukrainians managed to liberate most of the region in a few weeks, returning a number of cities to their control at once, including Izium. In mid-September, mass graves made by the Russians were discovered there. The Ukrainian prosecutor for the region said that at least 445 of the bodies were civilians. After the Russian army lost a bridgehead for a further offensive operation to the south, all military experts agreed that there was no longer any strategic or operational sense in storming Bakhmut. However, Prigozhin, that is to say, Evgeny Prigozhin, the founder of Wagner, very colorful individual. However, Prigozhin continued to fulfill the task assigned to him. This is the specificity of the power vertical that Vladimir Putin has been building for more than 20 years. If an order is given, it must be carried out, but not revised or even more so recognized as erroneous. Due to the massive influx of new mercenaries, Wagner had to expand its infrastructure. The appearance of many prisoners in Krasnodar Molkino could cause unnecessary conversations and threaten security, and the training ground itself was simply not designed for such a number of recruits. So Wagner got a new base where prisoners were transported from the airport in Rostov region. This base was located on the territory of the self-proclaimed Lugansk People's Republic, not far from its capital Lugansk. Prisoners often came there without even personal belongings. The administration of the penal colonies allowed them to take with them, at best, a pack of cigarettes. Here's a quote. Of course, they had to buy us everything, said one of the recruited men. and towels and soap and toothpaste, and socks and underwear. Dressed properly, 2 pairs of ankle boots, jackets, 3 pairs of suits, and they gave me sneakers. There were no problems with this at all. The boys somehow argued among themselves, "Damn, we're like cannon fodder. Let's go, no?" One says, "What the hell is cannon fodder? They've poured so many millions into us. What ammunition do we have?" At the base near Lugansk, the newly minted Wagnerites underwent training, as one of the former prisoners who later found himself in Ukrainian captivity said. Instructors taught them how to use Kalashnikov assault rifles and how to storm a trench. There, the commanders of Wagner clearly showed that Prigozhin, threatening the deserters with the death penalty, was not joking. As a Wagnerite who was captured in Ukraine said, when one of the prisoners escaped from the base but was caught by local police, he was brought back, tied to a post, and shot. Wagner recruits could communicate with loved ones only through a special app called Stream, developed at the request of Prigozhin's companies. According to one of the mercenaries, all conversations were recorded and listened to. The punishments have also become harsher. If previously a soldier could be put in a sea container specially designed for this purpose, tied up and beaten only for serious offenses, for example, for fights with colleagues or open disobedience to commanders, now one could end up in such a situation simply for talking with journalists. And I'll interject here, remember, any journalists that Wagnerites might be able to talk to would be either state-run Russian media or the pro-war military correspondents on Telegram or perhaps YouTube, mainly Telegram. So, despite the expectations associated with the cost of ammunition, the prisoners acted as a cannon fodder for Wagner commanders. If in Syria and Africa they tried to create an image for themselves of people who take care of their own personnel, then with the arrival of a huge number of newcomers without the slightest combat experience, the tactics of PMC, private military company, changed. In the Soviet years, such people were called contingent. There was no need to expect special training or discipline from prisoners, but it was necessary to maintain this discipline in combat conditions. To achieve this, Wagner used its usual tool, violence. The commanders of detachments of prisoners, who were prisoners just like their subordinates, received orders from their superiors to kill anyone who tried to escape from the battlefield. Failure to comply with this order threatened the commanders themselves with death. The Ukrainian military watched in amazement as the Wagnerites used the meat assault tactic. Groups of 10 prisoners each followed each other at equal distances from each other and continued to advance even when the Ukrainians shot those in front, even when an ordinary detachment of the regular army would have retreated to collect the dead and wounded. After returning from Bakhmut, one Ukrainian serviceman said that he had to turn to a psychologist for help because he did not understand how it was possible to fight like that. He said, "We machine gun them down in dozens, and new dozens come at you, and you lay them down again, and you put it down." And another Ukrainian officer found an explanation for this crazy approach. If they moved forward, he said, they have at least some chance of survival. If they retreat, they will definitely be killed. While carrying out combat missions in Bakhmut, Prigozhin did not take losses into account. Near the Wagner chapel, near the base in Molkino, dozens of graves of soldiers quickly began to appear, whose bodies there was no one to take. In a few months, the cemetery grew 7 times, and in the spring of, it grew 7-fold. In the spring of 2023, local authorities even tried to ban new burials there. It is not known exactly how many Wagnerites died during the assault on Bakhmut, but an analysis carried out by journalists found that there were at least 6,291 people. Prigozhin himself estimated the losses of his mercenaries during the storming of the city at 20,000, but most likely he also downplayed the true scale of losses. It is even more impossible to say how many of these people died in battle with the Ukrainians and how many at the hands of their own commanders. Hammer of Vengeance. In mid-November 2022, the main Russian news was a video in which 57-year-old Evgeny was killed with a sledgehammer. A native of Kazakhstan, Nuzhin joined the army back in Soviet times and continued to serve in the internal Russian troops until the mid-90s. In 1999, the court sentenced him to 24 years in prison. Nuzhin, in some mess, as he called it himself, killed one person and wounded another. He once tried to escape the prison colony, for which he received another 4 years. By the summer of 2022, Nuzhin had already served more than 3/4 of his sentence and was in authority, could use a phone and a tablet, and even, while in prison, got married for the second time. Nevertheless, when Prigozhin arrived at his Ryazan colony and invited the prisoners to go to the front, he volunteered and signed a contract with Wagner. Like other prisoners, Nuzhin underwent a week of training at a training ground near Lugansk, and in early September he found himself on the front line. And 2 days later he surrendered to the Ukrainians. While in captivity, a journalist from the Ukrainian publication Censor.net spoke with Nuzhin and then his other colleagues. Conversations with captured Russian soldiers after February the 24th generally became a kind of separate genre. Hundreds of such interviews can be found on YouTube and in the Ukrainian media. How much they can be trusted and how ethical these materials are in general is a separate question. The Geneva Convention, the Geneva Convention guarantees prisoners of war protection from the curiosity of the crowd, and some international journalistic organizations believe that interviews with Russian soldiers violates this and a number of other clauses of the convention. One way or another, Nuzhin told his interlocutors that he immediately signed up for Wagner in order to surrender. According to him, he had relatives in western Ukraine, so from the very beginning he was categorically against the Russian invasion and now would like to help Ukraine. It later became clear that these statements contradicted the content of social networks, which Nuzhin continued to run from prison. In them, he posted videos in support of Putin's policies and against Banderists, and posted Soviet and imperial flags, as well as quotes about the strength of the Russian spirit. Despite the abundance of various interviews with captured Russians, Nuzhin's case aroused particular interest and was widely circulated in the media. For the first time, a former prisoner confirmed that Wagner was recruiting people from prisons and told the details of this process from the inside. What happened next can only be speculated for now. It is known that Russia and Ukraine have at least several different channels through which the parties negotiate the exchange of prisoners. First of all, these are the defense ministries of both countries. Apparently, the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, has his own contact with Kyiv, who back in 2014 negotiated with the Ukrainian authorities on the release of journalists from the Russian propaganda site Life.ru, detained by the SBU. The main intelligence directorate and many field commanders operating in eastern Ukraine in 2014 had such contacts. One of the authors of this book then several times acted as an informal mediator or guarantor of security during prisoner exchanges. Obviously, after Wagner became fully involved in the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, Evgeny Prigozhin also developed his own ways of exchanging persons of interest. How exactly Nuzhin got on the exchange list is unknown. Ukrainian authorities have promised to treat prisoners of war in accordance with the Geneva Convention, but the extent to which a recruited person falls under its scope is not entirely a recruited prisoner falls under its scope is not entirely clear. On November 11th, Ukraine announced another exchange with Russia. Pro-Kremlin blogger Anastasia Kashevarova claimed at the same time that he followed the Wagner line. Later, a Kyiv source told reporters that the Russians offered very good conditions for Nuzhin, and Mikhail Podolyak, an advisor to the office of the Ukrainian president, said that Nuzhin signed the agreement to exchange voluntarily. On November 12, a video entitled "Hammer of Retribution" appeared in one of the Telegram channels associated with Prigozhin. It featured Evgeny Nuzhin. I was on the streets of Kyiv where I received a blow to the head, as a result of which I lost consciousness, the mercenary said. I woke up in this basement where they told me that I would be tried. After this, Nuzhin was hit on the head several times with a sledgehammer, and he died. Shortly after the video was published, Evgeny Prigozhin said that it was an excellent director's work. Nuzhin did not find happiness in Ukraine, but met with unkind but fair people, added the owner of Wagner. I think this film is called A Dog's Death for a Dog. By that time, it was already known that for violation of discipline, the Wagnerites could shoot or hang former prisoners who had become mercenaries. But the execution filmed on camera with a sledgehammer obviously referenced the story of the torture and murder of Syrian El Ismail in 2017. The Wagnerites also beat him to death with this construction tool. Seemed to be expected to shock even Russian society, which had seen a lot. It should have been, but it wasn't shocking. Presidential Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov did not comment on the publication of the video, saying that this is none of our business. Prigozhin himself, in his signature mocking manner, wrote to the Russian prosecutor general with a request to check the circumstances of the murder, simultaneously reporting the version that Nuzhin was recruited and then executed by American intelligence services. It is unknown whether this check was carried out. The fate of Evgeny Nuzhin, a Russian citizen who was subject to brutal extrajudicial execution by unknown assailants, apparently did not interest the investigative authorities. On paper, as they call it in Russian, Nuzhin continues to either sit or serve. At the time this book was being written, the former prisoner's relatives had not received his body and are unlikely to ever receive it at all. Back in 2014, one of the authors was faced with the fact that Russian volunteers who wanted to defend the Russian world, that is, Ruski Mir, but did not really understand where and why they were going, disappeared in Donbass mines abandoned due to the war, and their relatives then, for years, tried to find out what happened to their loved ones. We understand that whoever gives us this body will, in any case, be guilty and involved in his murder. Therefore, I think that this is impossible now, Nuzhin's daughter-in-law told reporters. What happened is on the conscience of the people who did it. It will all come back on them. Meanwhile, the Wagnerites, together with representatives of the Russian government and Kremlin propaganda, tried to make a sledgehammer into a symbol of some kind of justice that overtakes the traitors. Unknown persons threw sledgehammers into the territory of the Finnish embassy in Moscow. Prigozhin sent a sledgehammer to the European Parliament as a joke and gave it to the commander of the Chechen detachment, Akhmat, seriously. The leader of the parliamentary party, Just Russia, Sergei Mironov, and the mayor of the Tatar, Bugoma, posed with a sledgehammer. Probably it was not only the love of these people for illegal violence. By the end of 2022, Wagner PMC and its owner personally had tangible political capital. If Prigozhin admitted that he heads Wagner, after Prigozhin admitted that he heads Wagner, the activities of the PMC became absolutely public. Billboards calling for a contract with Wagner Join the winning team. Orchestra V is waiting for you. Appeared on the streets of major Russian cities. The PMC Wagner Center opened in St. Petersburg, an office building with 26.5 thousand square meters, which was declared a place for generating new ideas in order to increase Russia's defensive capability. Prigozhin made more and more public statements, and they became more and more daring. He called for blocking YouTube in Russia and openly accused the governor of St. Petersburg, Alexander Beglov, with whom he had been in conflict for a long time, of creating a criminal group for the purpose of embezzling budget funds. The creator of Wagner constantly gave interviews and comments to journalists. True, he communicated with some of them in a completely gangster manner. He called one a petty and dirty bastard, and reminded the other of folk wisdom. Don't stick your nose where a dog doesn't put his dick. Prigozhin traditionally did not answer Denis Korotkov's, that's one of the authors, questions for many years, and even breaking his own rule, never published these requests in his channels. The only time he betrayed himself was in the winter of 2023, when Korotkov once again turned to Prigozhin with a question about the losses of Wagner near Shalom. The answer came half an hour later and was quite personal. Korotkov, you fucker, you know that I think you are a complete shit. Let another journalist ask all the same questions and I will answer them culturally. But it's a shame to even sit down with you. The Kremlin turned a blind eye to all this hectic activity and did not refute publications that after the start of the invasion and the military success of Wagner PMC, Prigozhin entered the close circle of Vladimir Putin, who could even afford to criticize Russia's military strategy. Meanwhile, the battle for Bakhmut, despite all the meat assaults, did not end. Gradually, the first wave of prisoners recruited for the war began to expire their 6-month contracts, and they began to return home. Prigozhin kept his word, and his new employees appreciated it. I believe that the Wagnerites opened the door for me. Stanislav Bogdanov, who beat a judge to death in Novgorod, but, thanks to Prigozhin, was released after serving less than half his sentence, enthusiastically told reporters. This company is expanding and does not abandon its people. We will always have money. We will have work even if this war ends. I have new comrades, new friends, and a new family. I'm committed to these people. The worst nightmares of the victims of crimes committed by those who had gone to the front and their relatives began to come true. When the sister of the murdered judge saw a video in which Prigozhin met with Bogdanov and other released prisoners who were wounded in the war, she felt bad. Kaluga resident Anna Boltilnyuk, having learned that one of the men who brutally raped and killed her daughter Yana had been released, contacted the prosecutor's office, the Federal Penitentiary Service, and the reception office of the president, who pardoned the killer. She was told that according to the law, no one had to agree on a pardon with her. Thanks to Prigozhin, thousands of murderers and rapists were released after 6 months at the front. It was obvious that within a few weeks, one of them would commit a new crime. And so it happened. Already in April 2023, in a town near Kirov, Ivan Rosamachin, who had served only a couple years of his 14-year sentence, stabbed to death an 85-year-old neighbor. Soon such news became commonplace. In the Krasnodar region, a former prisoner and his friends killed 2 animators and burned their car. In the Primorsky territory, a freed Wagnerist strangled and burned an acquaintance. Near Krasnoyarsk, another man set fire to a house where a mother and daughter were both women, died. In Lipetsk, a Wagnerist killed his 4-year-old daughter. Prigozhin himself stated that by the summer of 2023, 32,000 men had served their contracts and received pardons, and only 0.25% of them had committed new crimes. However, the main problem for him was not that the former prisoners would be free and begin to terrorize their neighbors. The most important thing for him was to achieve the military result for which the epic with recruitment in the colonies was started, that is, to take Bakhmut. Wagner began to storm the city in August 2022, but autumn passed, winter began, and the end still did not come. And then Prigozhin found himself new enemies. So ends the excerpt. There's nothing terribly new here. I followed the news about Evgeny Prigozhin pretty closely back then. Um, but it was interesting getting the author's perspective, since he had worked as a mediator and had been a little bit closer. It was also nicely compiled. I'd like to get the book, but unfortunately it's only available as an ebook so far as I'm aware. And it's only available in Russian. And while I can... Я немножко понимаю по-русски. I don't read or speak it near well enough that I could just sit down and read the book. But anyway, a little bit dark. I hope you found it interesting, and have a good night.